Right, so let me set the stage. One time, that singer, Chris Isaak, who is famous entirely for writing that song Wicked Games, decided to play some wicked games of his own. Specifically, while presenting an MTV Movie Award for Best Kiss, he decided to demonstrate himself by forcefully kissing Cameron Diaz.
On the director say so.
Come here, baby. Come on. Come here, baby.
On the director say so.
Come here,
On the
Cameron.
director say so.
Excuse me. Come on, baby.
So yeah, obviously this has caused a controversy in retrospect, and it looks like people were pretty uncomfortable with it even at the time. But what's interesting is that I've seen this clip a lot on YouTube, Reddit, probably on TikTok if I had it, I'd imagine Instagram. My sister actually brought this clip up casually in conversation recently. Not a conversation about Chris Isaak though. Instead, everyone's talking about this clip because of Jim Carrey. See, so the story goes, after this, Jim Carrey won an award, and he decided to give Chris Isaak a taste of his own medicine by forcibly kissing him. The narrative people have made up in their own heads is that Jim Carrey was so morally offended by Chris Isaak kissing Cameron Diaz that he decided to punish him like a brave feminist hero. And this is what I see promoted by everyone who shares this story. Jim Carrey forcefully kisses Chris Isaak as a way of channeling his moral outrage over the violation of Diaz's consent. But like, here's the thing. Has nobody considered the possibility that I'd say is much more likely to be true? Maybe Jim Carrey just did the kiss to be funny. Indeed, maybe Carrey thought that Isaak kissing Diaz in the first place was funny, and he wanted to carry on the joke. Indeed, I would say that if somebody forcibly kisses someone, that is good evidence that they support forcibly kissing someone, rather than that they are morally opposed to it. Now, I would personally just take it for granted that 2026 internet commentators aren't going to be able to actually understand the mindset of 1995 Jim Carrey. But if you weren't inclined to just take that for granted, well, let me reveal the big bombshell. Just 2 years later, Jim Carrey forcibly kissed Alicia Silverstone in a much more aggressive way. By the way, she was 19 at the time. Jim Carrey was 35. Cool. So yeah, I think that precludes the possibility that Jim Carrey was just so morally offended by what he saw happening between Cameron Diaz and Chris Isaak that he felt the need to intervene and punish Isaak for the greater good. And I am genuinely concerned about this growing inability amongst a lot of people to interpret situations beyond their own moralistic lens. We decide that Chris Isaak is the creep and that we like Jim Carrey, so we interpret Jim Carrey's motivations to be what we want them to be to fit that narrative. But if you just took a second to consider what else his motivations might be, you might look up how his attitude has been towards women, especially the issue of forcibly kissing them, and you would quite immediately find this evidence to show he's probably not as against it as you thought. In fact, here's a comment I didn't have to scroll very far to find on that video of him kissing Alicia Silverstone. So in 1995, Chris Isaak did this to Cameron Diaz, and in response, Jim Carrey did it to Chris Isaak to show what a piece of shit Isaak was, but then Carrey did the same thing to Silverstone 2 years later. Again, a complete inability to recognize if you decide what motivations someone had for doing something, then you might end up confused when they act in a way no longer consistent with the feelings you just made up for them. Here's the funny thing though, there is some speculation, I don't know how reliable, but it's something I've heard said, that Chris Isaak was actually told to do this by the producers of the show. And it certainly does seem possible. Isaak was told to do this, maybe he didn't know that Cameron Diaz wasn't aware this was supposed to be happening, and then when she resisted, he tried to save face awkwardly by just forcing her because he felt put on the spot. I'm not saying that's definitely the case, and I'm not saying it would entirely excuse his actions if it was the case, but it is a possibility, and it would certainly reframe the narrative significantly from how it's presented. And if that is the case, it would be quite funny that Chris Isaak maybe isn't actually that comfortable or not in the habit of forcefully kissing people, but it was just suggested to him, he went along with it without really thinking it through, and then he was pretty much put on the spot. And meanwhile, it's Jim Carrey Carrey who was so on board with it that the second there was a suggestion of, oh, we're forcefully kissing people, sign me up. Another irony here is that Chris Isaak being so uncomfortable makes the situation more awkward, whereas if a guy just goes for it more forcefully, like Jim Carrey does, it's less awkward in the moment because you can't notice the woman objecting. So the reason I say that's ironic is because if Chris Isaak had just Jim Carrey'd it and grabbed her and kissed her forcefully right away, maybe it would have been less awkward because we couldn't have seen her objecting. Obviously, I have no reason to defend Chris Isaak. I'm not a huge fan of him, but I will just point out this is not really an individualized thing. People talk about us having an R-word culture, and a lot of people would say that's kind of an over-the-top way of describing the society we have, where for the most time, sexual crimes are abhorred. But I do think in the case of kissing, there is this idea that just passionately grabbing a woman and kissing her without her consent is romantic. Certainly the individual who I can think of that best managed to play it off coolly was Adrian Brody kissing Halle Berry. I mean, a lot of people now recognize that was inappropriate, but I also think there are plenty of other people who remember it more as this romantic, passionate moment where he was just overcome with enthusiasm and it's perfectly excusable, rather than just thinking of it as entirely problematic. And of course, who can forget one of the most iconic photos in world history, that guy kissing that girl after the World War was over, which was non-consensual. It's considered this really passionate moment, and it is kind of celebrated by the whole world that this guy's just so happy that the war's over. Look, they're kissing. It shows that the world's going to be better now. But this girl's consent was violated. It's an example where the spontaneity of passion runs into the ethical necessity of establishing at least some form of consent beforehand. And that's why I would like to present some useful advice to all the fellas out there. Kiss your wife. If you want someone you can kiss without having to choose between asking first or being cancelled, kiss your wife. Don't make out with a random woman just because they happen to be presenting you an award or in your vicinity when a war is over. Avoid that minefield entirely by simply kissing your wife. Anyway, just one final unrelated story to confirm that the internet has in fact lost their minds. Do you remember when Kanye West interrupted Taylor Swift to be like, hey, shut up Taylor, because Beyonce had the best music video of all time? Obviously, it was an inappropriate, humiliating and disrespectful thing to do to someone, and everyone agreed at the time that Kanye was being a jerk. But it turns out that P. Diddy was at this ceremony, and I guess maybe he was going to hug her or something, and people are claiming that Kanye heroically stepped in to save Taylor from Diddy. Now, I don't want it to be underappreciated how stupid this is. People are deciding that because P. Diddy was in the vague vicinity of Taylor, Kanye must have been jumping in to rescue her, and that's why he did this. Even though there's no reason to think that Kanye is in the habit of keeping women safe from predators, and there's every reason to think he's the type of person who would interrupt a moment in a wildly inappropriate way to bring the attention entirely onto himself. But despite there being no reason to think this is consistent with the type of person he is at all, people have just decided he was doing this to save her. And again, just like with Jim Carrey, we have later evidence that totally contradicts this being his motivation, and it's being ignored. Kanye West later released a song where he said, I feel like me and Taylor might still have sex because I made that bitch famous. So, how is that keeping Taylor Swift safe from Diddy? What's the secret heroic motivation there? Kanye is just so concerned with Diddy's horrible treatment of women that he sexualizes, berates, and undermines the musical talent of this woman by suggesting him humiliating her in front of everyone is the main reason she's famous in the first place. Like a hero. Yes, this is far more schizo and far more obviously nonsense than the Jim Carrey case. It has to be understood that just because you have an opinion, and especially just because you have new information that wasn't even available at the time, that doesn't allow you to reinterpret the motivations of why people did these things in a way that is contradictory to their overall character. And I think the internet's either making this more obvious or making it worse. A growing number of people who don't care about understanding why people are actually doing what they're doing, and more about making it fit with their insane theories.